Hi there, and welcome to another update on the geologic situation that's been taking place on the Reykjanes Peninsula in Iceland. This is Geology Professor Sean Wilsey here with you. Thanks for joining me. Today is July 25th. It is about 9:30 a.m. here Mountain Daylight Time, about 3:30 in the afternoon in Iceland. And it's been probably a good maybe week or more since I've done an Iceland update, and I do apologize a bit. The last few days I've been busy making videos for Kilauea and an event in Yellowstone, and so I've been wanting to do another Iceland update, but it just kept getting pushed to the back burner. But nonetheless, here we are, and I have some important things to share with you. Basically, all data that we have looked at and collected over the past few weeks indicates that we are headed towards some type of an eruption or intrusion in the next few weeks, in the coming weeks. No one knows for sure, of course, or the location, but the Met Office has a really interesting update and laid out a few scenarios that might take place. So let me walk you through the latest update from the Met Office, and this came out 2 days ago, the 23rd, and that's when I wanted to do the update, but again, some other events kind of put this on the back burner. So let me walk you through the Met Office update. We'll look at some of the latest seismic and ground deformation data and a couple of news items to round this up. Thanks as always to Amanda Jo for helping me put together these updates. She's instrumental in getting me the news and providing some of the information that makes my job so much easier. So thank you to Amanda Jo. So yeah, likelihood of a new magma flow or an eruption in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So based on what they're seeing so far, it looks like the magma is going to reach that critical threshold and be forced to move somewhere, either up to the surface, generating an eruption, or maybe moving into some new region in the subsurface and forming an intrusion. So the big key takeaway points here: land rise continues, so the uplift in inflation continues. Magma accumulation under Svartsengi has been quite stable if you look at the last few weeks. Estimates in terms of volume is about 13 to 19 million cubic meters of magma must now be added under Svartsengi from the last eruption. What they think it's going to take to actually trigger the eruption is something between 13 to 19 million cubic meters of magma. According to model calculations, the amount added since the last eruption is around 16 million cubic meters. So we're definitely in the window. We're within the zone based on all the data we have and the estimates that we can put together and the projections of this thing getting to the trigger point of an eruption. And accordingly, with things being a little more tense there, the risk level has been raised in light of the latest data, and scenarios have been updated. I want to walk you through those scenarios here in a second. But briefly, just going through the rest of the update here. Seismic activity of the last few days has been quite low. Remember, this was 2 days ago, this update. 10 earthquakes in the past 24 hours, 90 in the past week. It has, I think, uptick. There's been a bit of an uptick, I think, the last 2 days since this update came out, but it's small. It might even be negligible. So we'll see if that holds water. I haven't counted them and done a full analysis, but just in looking at the map, it looks like maybe there's been a few more than during this period. Most of them are 1 in magnitude, similar to the same locations. For comparison, more than 50 earthquakes were recorded daily in the run-up to the last eruption. So basically, we're going to need to see a lot more earthquakes occurring over time, temporally, in order for an eruption to occur. Let's see. Land rise continues and magma accumulation has been stable. Let's see. We got this all in the highlights there. There's some uncertainty calculations, but we can expect a new magma flow and possibly an eruption in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We've looked at this graph before of the last different events and how much magma volume it took to trigger those, magma accumulation. We've looked at this graph previously as well. The one that we're interested in here, of course, is the red one. That's our current status. All these other lines, if they end with a star, that was an eruption. If they end with a square, that was a magma intrusion. So that's the last, 5 or 6 different events. And then the critical threshold of magma, the total volume of magma it took for that event to transpire. So you can see we're well past about 12 and 13 or so million cubic meters of magma, but we've had to go as high as 20 before in prior eruptive events. So in fact, this was the last eruptive event here that ended in this past month. So So we'll see where this goes. All our measurements and calculations, this is a quote, indicate that the accumulation of magma continues at a constant rate. It's not unusual that we get fluctuations in measurements between individual days. That's why it's important to look at the overall picture based on GPS measurements, satellite images, and models over a longer period of time. So yeah, you don't want to look at like a small sample size. You want big period of time as much as you can. No evidence in our data suggests anything other than we can expect a new magma flow or even an eruption in the next 2 to 3 weeks or so. So that's the official statement coming out of the Met Office. And then let me walk you through the scenarios real quick here. Let me maybe show you it on a map first, and then we'll go through kind of the text description. Let's maybe make this a little cleaner too. Let's take, you guys know where a lot of these eruptions have occurred. So of course, just as a quick review, this was the location of the December eruption shown here in orange. And then we had the January eruption, which was much closer to town, kind of the anomaly, I guess, among the bunch. The February eruption went back to this more northerly zone, just due east of the power plant in the Blue Lagoon. The March eruption was somewhat similar in terms of location. And then we had this most recent eruption that began May 29th that started in that same area as well. So basically in these two scenarios that the Met Office has put together, they are saying that the most likely probability for an eruption would be either this region just to the east of Seilingerfeld, so this area up here where we've seen all these other eruptions take place. We know we have a plumbing system established. We know there's conduits and pathways for the magma to flow. They've been well established, so it makes sense that this is a very likely location for the next eruption. So that's one scenario they lay out, and then they give estimates on how long, if that eruption was sustained, how long would that lava take to flow southward and encounter the berms, the defenses that are around Grindavik in this area down here. The other scenario, though, that they put out, and one I think that is predicated partly because of what happened on January 14th, but also what happened during this last eruption that began on May 29th. I'm sure some of you have seen pictures or videos. There's some big cracks and some fractures in Hagafelt, this hill, this small low hill just north of the town. And there's new fractures that we've of course have opened up in Grindavik. And so the other scenario that's laid out is a more southerly eruptive location with vents opening up possibly inside the berm, possibly within the town, or maybe just near Hagafelt here. So one scenario, again, more up in this area, and then the second scenario calls for an eruption in this area. So let's just kind of look at how the Met Office kind of spells those out. There you can see the, I won't blow this up, but you can see the hazard level along the Sunnukur lineament here. This northeast-southwest trend where we've seen the last eruptions is at the highest level, but also in the town of Grindavik itself. This is where we see the highest hazard level. So scenario one, eruption with a source between Stora Stogafelt and Sunnukur. So that would be the area further to the north up here, just east of the Blue Lagoon and the power plant. And so similar to the eruptions from December, February, March, and May, likely cause is a local series of, so we'd get a small set of earthquakes probably preceding that. The earthquakes would probably not be very large, not that many of them, pretty short notice because we already have those pathways established. So remember, earthquakes are rocks breaking. The magma doesn't need to break through a lot of new rock here in order to generate an eruption at this location because those pathways have been established. And lava could reach the north-south road that goes by the Blue Lagoon in less than an hour and a half, and then possibly around Thorbjorn. So the road going north-south near the Blue Lagoon in 1.5 hours, and then over near Svartsengi in less than 3 hours. So that's just estimating, depending on exactly where the vent was, the time the lava might take there based on the topography. And of course, the big variable here is like lava output and volume and such. And then here's this other scenario. So an eruption with a source south of Sunnukur at Hagafelt or south of Hagafelt. This would be probably more earthquakes because we've only seen one event here. So while there may be some pathways there, we anticipate there might be more rock that would need to break, so you could get a little bit more warning time potentially. Yeah, and they say here it's likely warning time would be longer than scenario 1, but how much is uncertain. Longer notice is determined by how far south the magma makes its way before it reaches the surface. Lava could reach these other roadways in less than 1.5 hours and could possibly block escape routes on land out of Grindavik in about 6 hours. So that's where they're quite nervous with this statement coming out of the Met Office in terms of, okay, we've got quite a few people back in Grindavik. They're even looking at making some repairs. We'll look at that here in the news in a second. And if this plays out, especially if it was at night where things are a little bit more chaotic, it's harder and takes longer to evacuate folks at night versus daytime, and with lava flows possibly blocking escape routes, how would that play out? So in this scenario, lava could reach the sea east of Grindavik in 1.5 to 3 hours. And then they talk about some of the hazards where the lava going into the ocean, cooling the lava, you get some explosive conditions possibly there, and generation of hydrochloric acids, aerosols in that immediate vicinity. So bad news right there near that ocean setting if that were to take place. There would be a lot of cracks and fractures in the ground. And in this scenario, the possibility that lava can arise within Grindavik must be assumed. One possibility is that lava emerging from a vent to the north of the berms or defenses, ramparts, at Grindavik can overflow fissures and then reemerge through open fissures within the town limit. So it can actually, go down into these cracks and then come back up. It can use those existing cracks and fractures and faults as pathways to kind of guide the lava through town. Possibility of a fissure opening within Grindavik cannot be ruled out, but in that case, it's considered most likely that a fissure would first open north of the town before something opens within the town limit. So, could the vent open up in the town? Yes, I think we've realized that the entire time, but that seems to be a less likely scenario than a vent opening up further to the north. And then they just talk about, given all these scenarios, we need to be prepared. The experience from the eruption in January tells us we cannot rule out the possibility of fissure opening within Grindavik. But in that case, it's most likely that it would open to the north. We kind of talked about that. So, so an interesting update from the Met Office, and I think a good one in that, laying out these specific scenarios. This is what the Met Office job is to do, is to take this scientific data, disseminate it, make their best judgments, and then put out, in this case, some possible scenarios, and then it's up to the public officials to decide what to do with that information in terms of dealing with public safety and issuing warnings if that's the case, and so forth. So there's your Met Office update. Let's look now at some of the seismic data. Again, over the past 24 hours or so, not a whole lot happening, but I'd say, given what I've looked at over the past few weeks, I'd say I haven't looked at the statistics here, but it looks like it's maybe a tiny bit of an uptick. A couple more earthquakes happening in this area versus in weeks past. But again, these are quite small earthquakes, most of them below 1. You can see the different magnitudes here. Most of these are still at some of quite variable depths. Some are shallower, some are a little bit deeper. But none of them in and of themselves are indicative of magma moving towards the surface just yet anyway. So there's our seismic data for the past 24 hours. If we look back at the last week or so, remember these dots are all color coded. A little hard to see these tiny dots here. The earthquakes are so small. Let me get the right kind of scale here. But you can see the area in question, and you can see the colors there, and there's quite a few. I'd say a lot of the yellows, oranges, and reds are probably, just eyeballing this, the more dominant color type here, which means these are more recent, right? The older ones would be the greens and the blues, and I guess kind of almost the purples here. So maybe a slight little uptick in overall number of earthquakes, but again, it's quite small. The earthquakes are small themselves. The uptick is quite small, going from 8 to 10 earthquakes a day to like 15 isn't a huge deal yet. But something to keep an eye on for sure. So the seismic data, I think, moving forward, while in weeks past we maybe haven't needed to look at that as closely, I think this would be something you'd want to watch in the days to come, is to watch this seismic data And it could accelerate quickly. You could go from this sort of more or less background distribution of earthquakes to rapid clustering within just a few hours that indicate that magma is moving in the subsurface. So something to keep an eye on. Looking at the GPS data, one important thing here with the GPS data is there was a bit of a glitch or a hiccup in the GPS data being relayed. So you'll see a gap over here on the right side here. This is the Svartsengi station. So this gap that exists in most of the GPS stations is something with the telemetry or just getting the data relayed. They had a couple days where it wasn't transmitting the data, and so that's why we see the gap here. But nonetheless, even with the gap, you can see the trend continuing. This Svartsengi uplift graph here with the red dots might look different than the ones we've seen in the past, a shallower slope, not nearly as steep, because it looks like they changed the scale. So by making the scale larger, that sort of flattened out these slopes a little bit. It's still the same amount of uplift, it just graphically looks a little bit less pronounced, I suppose. And you can see it, they did not mess with some of these other stations, I believe, and so these other ones like the Elver station, that's kind of more like what we're used to seeing, is that kind of level of detail. Notice the error bars here, their size, and look at the slope of the line here. And then again, if you go back to the Svartsengi one, look how small. The error bars are much smaller because everything is compressed because they've expanded the scale up to 360 millimeters here. Yeah, so the GPS data largely it looks the same. Continued inflation in the area. And we've pretty much reached or nearly reached the threshold that was required for the last eruption to take place. So again, all data points to us being well within the sweet spot, if you will, if that's the right phrase we want to use, for an eruption or a magma intrusion happening sometime soon. If we look at the latest INSAR ground deformation data, so this is again flying a satellite passing over this portion of Iceland and over 2 different dates. So July 8th it went over it, then it went over the same area again, made another pass July 19th. So it was just maybe like 5 or so days ago. And then it measures the difference in elevation over that period of time. So each little band here corresponds to a certain amount of uplift. So you can see the bullseye here, just within that 11-day window, there was measurable and quantifiable amounts of uplift. So here's the road coming out of Grindavik. The eruption sites are kind of over here, and this is where the magma storage area is sort of centered, is right more or less just close to the power plant in the Blue Lagoon, slightly southwest of it, I suppose. So INSAR data, GPS data, all pointing towards continued inflation. These allow us to make better models and quantify things a little bit. So we're right there, friends. Selfishly, I'm leaving for a river trip tomorrow. On Friday, I'll be back Monday. So selfishly, I hope nothing happens in the next 4 or 5 days. And then I'll be back and I can monitor things and report on these things as well. So let's go to some of the news that took place over the past couple days. So I just have 2 news stories for you here to round out this update. So 20 tiny earthquakes in the past 24 hours. This is from today or 9 hours ago. So this is pretty current here. So again, the uptick that I think was there visually is corroborated a little bit here. And then, let's see, I thought I had more there. Maybe not. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, notice for next eruption could be a few minutes. And I'll put links to all these in the video description. So they actually elevated the emergency level. The Civil Defense Agency elevated the emergency level for Grindavik just based on the scientific data showing that we're getting closer and given the number of people that are there. So we need to increase our preparedness, increase our monitoring. Warning time can only be a few minutes. Our plans are now to be able to start the evacuation, activate the sirens, and send messages in a shorter time than before. So they're hopefully, with practice, just like anything in life, with practice, you ideally get better at it. And they've gone through this a few times. It's not their first rodeo. And so ideally, they're getting a little bit better in Grindavik, and I think they've done wonderfully in terms of the evacuation, the efficiency, just getting things done well there. But I'm sure there's room for bits of improvement here and there. And then this is interesting here. About 250 to 300 people work in the town every day. They were planning on doing a lot of work in terms of repairing the roads and the pipes in town. They've invested some time and money into repairing some of the infrastructure there, so that will increase the number of people there as you have more workers there. Somewhat, I don't want to use the word ironic if that's correct, but that on one hand, the Met Office just said, hey, there's a good scenario or chance here that this could erupt in town or very close to town, while at the same time they're trying to make these repairs. So I don't know. That's just it's an interesting contrast. I think that's the best way to put it. Then they said that one of the public officials here says that they think it's pretty safe during the day to have people in the town. It's been shown that it's very quick to evacuate during the day. We're more concerned about those who stay here, people that are staying overnight. They're concerned about getting those folks out at that time. And are they going to restrict further access based on what's going on? Right now, no, is what they say. So another interesting article there. It's fascinating to me to see kind of how the community and the public officials deal with this sort of ongoing, seemingly never-ending volcanic and seismic threat to this community. But I'm sure they're doing the best they can. The defensive berms, I don't know if they've done any work with the ones around Grindavik. I think those have largely stayed pat. They've probably done a little bit there, and I think they've done a little bit of the repair work and added a second one here and maybe raised this one as well around the power plant. So we'll see what happens in the coming days or weeks. I'll be leaving tomorrow, so maybe another update from me could be late Monday if something significant takes place. Otherwise, Tuesday the 30th would be my first kind of full day back, and we can see what's going on at that point and give you an update on all the latest. So thanks again for your support of the channel. Thanks again for watching, and we'll just stay tuned together, and best of luck to our good friends in Iceland. And yeah, that's it. Thanks so much. Take care.